European Union ambassadors in Aden to discuss with Yemeni government political and economic crisis. United Nations Office for Humanitarian Affairs says Yemen's response plan lacks funding. The ongoing war destroys the educational infrastructure and drives children out of school. Good evening and welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. Ambassadors of the European Union arrived to the interim capital, Aden. EU ambassadors welcomed the return of Yemeni government to Aden and expressed full support to it, calling for the full implementation of Riyadh Agreement. More on this is in the following report.
European Union ambassadors arrived in Aden as the first visit of a high-ranking diplomat since the appointment of the Yemeni government on February 2, 2021. This visit comes amid Houthi military escalation in Ma'rib, crumbling economy, and local currency collapse in government-controlled areas. During the meeting, European support for Yemen, especially in economic and humanitarian aspects, were discussed. Most importantly, delivering urgent support to achieve stability of the national currency and to avoid major repercussions on living conditions of citizens. In turn, ambassadors of the European Union and the Swedish envoy to Yemen affirmed to go beyond providing humanitarian aid and finding real economic support to help the government. The EU mission reassured their support for international efforts to bringing peace to Yemen and condemned Houthi military escalation on Ma'rib, stressing on Houthis to stop the escalation and involve in the peace track. The visit of the European Union ambassadors to Aden comes after important political developments, the first of which is the statement of the British ambassador to Yemen, Richard Oppenheim, which was the first of its kind, who stressed that any political settlement between the conflicting parties in Yemen needs a new UN resolution. This was followed by an important statement by the US envoy, who confirmed that some progress has been made in the Yemeni file, as an international consensus on the necessity of ending the war was established, stressing that there is no military solution to the war in Yemen. These political efforts to reach peace come at a time when Houthi militia escalating military operations in Ma'rib. Militia's violations affected civilians in Abdiyah, Harib and Juba. They also prevented humanitarian aid passage. This escalation led to the displacement of thousands of citizens from these districts to other areas affected by the conflict. On the contrary, areas under government's control undergo an economic crisis. Citizens suffer from a rise in food and oil products amid the governmental indifference. Endless and intense international movements amid military escalation and economic collapse that Yemen in general is suffering from, and Yemenis in particular, who hope in some way that these political efforts will end their suffering that has lasted 4 years.
UN Special Envoy for Yemen Grunberg met in Dubai with Anwar Karkash, diplomatic advisor to the United Arab Emirates President. The two parties discussed the importance of the UAE's role in supporting UN efforts to achieve a comprehensive and negotiated political settlement in Yemen. Hans Grunberg reviewed results of his meetings with various parties, praising the UAE's support for his mission. The United Nations Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned that Yemen continues to be the world's worst humanitarian crisis. The office outlined that the 2021 Yemen Humanitarian Response Plan remains largely underfunded, citing that only $2.51 billion have been received out of $3.85 billion. On the other hand, the United Nations Development Programme welcomed a Dutch contribution with $9 million to enhance safety and justice in Yemen. The program indicated that the Dutch funding will help establish a new 3-year project to enhance comprehensive access to justice in 4 governorates. The project aims at supporting the recovery and re-establishment of institutions in Yemen. Dozens of the Houthi militia were killed or wounded, including leaders, in continuous battles south of Ma'rib. The battles coincided with intense artillery shelling by government forces, targeting gatherings and movements of the Houthi militia. The battles caused heavy losses in lives and equipment among the rebels. In Hodeidah, the joint forces thwarted Houthi militia attacks south of the city. The military media of the joint forces reported units of the joint forces then monitored Houthi militia movements in Hais, El Jabaliya and El Fazza areas in El Tuhaita district. Sources said the joint forces inflicted heavy losses among the rebels. Tai's joint forces air defenses shot down 2 Houthi drones in El Barah region. Military sources said 2 planes tried to fly over military sites. They added one of the 2 planes was brought down intact, while the other was intercepted and shot down. On the same line, clashes renewed between government forces and the Houthi militia west and east of the region. In the east of the city, government forces thwarted an infiltration attempt by the Houthi militia on Karifit front. This comes a day after 14 Houthis were killed and injured after government forces launched an attack on Houthi positions west of the city. Clashes took place between the Houthi militia and government forces stationed in Thara front between El Baida and Abyan. Sources said that the Houthi militia tried to station in new sites aiming to advance to the front lines in Thara, but was confronted by mortars shelling. A new report by Save the Children revealed that more than 60% of Yemeni children did not return to the classroom last year after the schools were attacked. The report published on the organization's website stated that 1 out of every 5 children had encountered safety concerns on his way to school, which had put his life and education at risk. More on this is in the following report.
During the past 5 years, about 500 schools were attacked, and more than 2,500 schools were damaged due to the conflict in Yemen. Schools that were used to educate children and upbring their behavior became collective shelters for displaced families and are occupied by armed groups, which led to forcing about 400,000 children to leave schools. Organizations urged all parties to stop attacks against schools, remove arms, and protect children in times of armed conflict. This, along with ensuring humanitarian access so students can safely access education. The educational process is not affected only by war, it's also affected by a Houthi mindset that poisons the educational content. Houthis, according to educational sources, stuffed the content with materials that serve their familial and extremist mindset. This Houthi crime adds to the woes of education, and children who are required by the rebels to be sent to the war fronts instead of schools. The Houthi deformation process aims, according to experts, at defacing the national identity of Yemen and replacing it with another Iranian-aligned agenda. Difficulties of education in Yemen, however, continue with lack of facilities. Pressure on government-run schools is mounting after the private schools raised their fees by nearly 35%. As to the parents, they are confronted with many economic hurdles and struggle to strike a balance between the future of their children and the basic necessities of their life. All of that called upon the government and the international community to help Yemen in its identity-saving struggle.
Coming next. Angry rallies sweep some southern cities over local currency drop and high prices.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف، والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف، والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة لما خرج لما ندي 12 كيلو ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل ما احنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. The Alliance of Young Men and Women of the political parties in Abyan Governorate organized a protest in Zanzibar. The alliance denounced economic policies, worsening living conditions, and rise in food and oil prices. The following report has more on that story.
The Association of Political Parties in Abyan implements a watch to denounce the deterioration of the living situation and the deterioration of the currency. Political parties in Abyan Governorate organized a protest stand in front of the old government complex in Zanzibar district capital of Abyan Governorate to denounce their rejection of starvation policies, the deteriorating living conditions, the outrageous rise in food and consumer prices and oil derivatives, and the collapse of the national currency.
Us, the youth, are protesting under the name of high prices. We call on international communities and the Middle Eastern countries to send foreign currencies to the central bank in Aden and create an economic expert committee to stop the deteriorating economic situation in Yemen.
The protesters raised banners that said, "We demand the government to act before the time forces the collapse of the currency and the rise in prices that led to deterioration of the situation in the economic sector," and other angry slogans that reflect the extent of suffering as a result of the economic deterioration and the rise in consumer prices.
We protest today asking to make the prices less and to make the economic situation better. We ask the government to find urgent solutions to fix the living condition in Yemen.
The living and economic conditions are witnessing a sharp deterioration in light of the continued neglect of the concerned authorities to stop the economic collapse, which was reflected on the living situation of citizens, in addition to lack of basic services, especially electricity and oil derivatives, and the spread of black market in the city, where many beggars appeared in the public streets and mosques as a result of the tragic situation.
We call on local authorities and the government to do their duties. We are suffering from high costs of living and unpaid salaries. We are really struggling with this issue.
The protesters affirmed that they would continue to protest until their legitimate demands are achieved, as guaranteed by the law, the Constitution, and religious regulations.
Also, protests on the economic collapse continued in Al-Musaymir district in Lahj. Angry protesters complained about the rise in food prices and the decline of basic services. They asked local authorities to control prices of food supplies and to hold manipulators accountable. In addition, they called on the government to stop the continuous collapse of the national currency. To Aden, the Central Bank of Yemen suspended work in 8 money transfer networks for committing violations. The bank warned citizens against dealing with these exchange companies. The central bank had earlier suspended the licenses of 60 exchange companies in an attempt to save the national currency. The deterioration of economy in Yemen has affected all sections of society. People are striving hard in order to live. More in the following report.
There are many pains and tragedies shared by Yemenis throughout the years of war, which are exacerbating day after day. However, the specter of hunger this time haunts everyone because of the continuous deterioration of the national currency. A new phase of the collapse of the Yemeni rial, its features seem catastrophic, the victim of which is the simple Yemeni citizen. And the first accused in the eyes of the citizen is the legitimate government, which is now seen as a partner in the deterioration of the Yemeni rial, indifferent to the condition of the citizen who is devastated by poverty and hunger from all sides, as well as its rigid and passive role before traders manipulate the prices of consumer goods without any control.
When you ask any merchant about the price of a kilo of tomatoes, he tells you 2,000 riyals, while another one tells you 2,200. Each one has a price. People who are well off can survive, but incapable people, where do they go? And those who have children, where do they go? They go for begging. Enough is enough. This has become a war, and more intense than war at the front. Every day the prices change. Every day something new happens.
We want Yemeni people to unite and elect government from among the people and through the leaders of the fronts who are defending Yemen and the Republic.
An unprecedented deterioration of the Yemeni rial, 1,380 rials against $1, offset by a 130% increase in the remittance fees between Sana'a and Aden, a sharp increase in food prices by 80%. Figures that can be increased in light of the absence of any solutions from the official authorities. More than half of Yemenis are below the poverty line and unable to secure life requirements, according to UN reports.
Every day the prices change. There is no control over the merchants, and there is a difference in prices between one trader and another. And if you ask them, they tell you the dollar is expensive or the Saudi riyal is expensive.
Currently, prices are insane and above any limits. The citizen cannot bear it. A person who has 10 children cannot feed them, cannot even buy them tomatoes for 500 riyals and cannot afford to buy them anything.
Nothing on the horizon seems clear to end the suffering of millions of Yemenis, whose only concern has become a secure and stable life, because of the Houthi militias' continued intransigence against every peace initiative and the absence of the legitimate government towards the suffering of Yemenis.
Minister of Health discussed with the resident representative of the World Health Organization in Yemen ways to enhance bilateral cooperation. The two sides reviewed developing and strengthening work in the isolation centers for COVID-19, in addition to contributing to activating vaccination campaigns. The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 17 new cases of the COVID-19 in 5 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 7 cases were recorded in Aden, 4 in Hadramaut, 4 in Al-Mahra, 1 in Taiz, and 1 in Al-Bayda. Also 10 deaths were recorded, plus 23 recovered cases. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 9,728, including 1,868 deaths and 6,332 cases of recovery. Here's a reminder of the main headlines. European Union ambassadors in Aden to discuss with Yemeni government political and economic crisis. United Nations Office for Humanitarian Affairs says Yemen's response plan lacks funding. The ongoing war destroys educational infrastructure and drives children out of school. This brings us to the end of the news. It was Roshan Fuad. Have a great day.